Hello, welcome back to my channel if you're new here. My name is Mary and today I'm going to be talking about the most surprising books that I read in 2023. So these are all pleasant surprises. These are all books that I obviously thought I would enjoy or I would not have picked them up in the most cases, but I ended up liking them a lot more than I thought I would. I liked the tropes more than I thought I would. I liked the writing style more than I thought I would. I liked the characters, etc. You get it. Not all of these books were 5 stars for me, but none of these books are going on my favorites of the year. I will talk about books that are on my favorites of the year that did surprise me in that video, but right now I just want to talk about books that did not make that video so I can talk about these somewhere because I was so pleasantly surprised by them. Without further ado, I'm doing these first. I'm going to go over books that did not get 5 stars for me, but I was really surprised by them. The first one that I want to talk about is actually 2 books by Darcy Coates that I read back in October. So I read The Haunting of Ashburn House and The Haunting of Lee Harker. And these are both gothic horror stories, and they both primarily focus on one main female protagonist who's living in this house that is haunted. And they're different houses, they're different storylines, they're very different. I will link the vlogs, hopefully, where I read them, because I think I read them both in one vlog in October, but I could be wrong. It was during Spookoplathon, but neither of them were read for prompts, I don't think, but I talk about them there. But these books, I was expecting this to be very, what I think of like traditional horror books being, and being pretty gross, being pretty scary. And honestly, I know that these books are on Kindle Unlimited, and that definitely lowered my expectations for them. I don't know what that's about, but when I hear a book is on Kindle Unlimited, I'm expecting it to be like a romp, but not necessarily like a great book. But I highly enjoyed my time reading both of these. I thought the atmosphere was done so well. I really enjoyed the writing style, and I really liked the way that Darcy Coates takes her time with her characters and really makes you feel for them, and they feel like real people. So both of these books got 4 stars for me. I did like The Haunting of Ashburn House better than The Haunting of Lee Harker, but not by a ton. I would still recommend both of them. The next book that I want to talk about is Social Creature by Tara Isabel Burton. So this book I do not think will be for everybody, just based on the reviews alone. It's about this woman who is about to be 30. She lives in New York City. She's trying to make it as a writer, and she hasn't published anything yet. And she's not really even querying right now. Like right now, what she's doing is all of these odd jobs. I think she bartends part-time. She's a barista part-time. She tutors kids for the SATs part-time, and she just doesn't have the energy to expend on her writing at the minute. And she meets this young socialite who sort of takes her under her wing, and she gets like really enthralled with this socialite's life and just like the way that her life is impacted by this. And it's like an exploration of their toxic friendship, which I've discovered is a thing that I really, really love in books. I like another book a lot that I'm going to talk about later that has the same toxic friendship vibe, and that's what I liked about that book too. In the description of this book, it does say that it's compared to another book, and I've seen some of the reviews of this book saying that it's a direct ripoff of that other book. I have not read that other book. I have not seen adaptations of that other book. I believe it, but I don't know what happens in that other book, so I can't really comment on that. But I just really liked the exploration of toxic female friendship in here. I thought it was so interesting, and it's so funny. It's not super similar to the movie Saltburn, but they both have that like toxic friendship, will do anything to keep this friendship and to keep your own, like, your place in this world that you don't really belong in, but you want to belong in. So I think if you liked the movie Saltburn, you would really enjoy this book. Anyways, Social Creature by Tara Isabella Burton, excuse me. I was so surprised by. I have had this on my TBR, probably it came out in 2018. So I think in 2018 is when I started getting back into reading, and I went through lists of popular books that came out that year. And that's how I started building my TBR initially, was going through lists of books that people thought you should read. And this has been on that list since 2018, and I got to it, baby. So we read it this year, and I'm glad I did. The next book that really surprised me is The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna. I read The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna several years ago now, I think 2021, and I really disliked that book. I didn't really like the characters. There was like an insta-love thing I wasn't really into. I've never been into the good Nazi trope, and that's kind of in there, and that's sort of the book that pushed me over the edge and made me realize like maybe World War II historical fiction is not for me. But this book I loved. It's in the Dust Bowl. I read it around the same time that I was reading The Grapes of Wrath, which is on my worst and most disappointing books of the year. And this is just like, for me, this was a much more palatable take. And that's a very like, I don't don't know, privileged thing to say, I guess, that I wanted like a palatable take on some people's like worst years of their lives. But I liked the characters more in this. It's a female character focused book, which is what Kristen Hanna tends to do. I will say around the 50% mark, some things happened that made this book lose a lot of its credibility to me. So it sort of became unbelievable. But I really liked the character. What's her name? Her name's Elsa Martinelli. I loved her. I was really like taken in by her story, and I really felt for her. I loved her relationship with her daughter. I did like the romance. It got better for me as it went along. I just really enjoyed this book. I would reread it, which is surprising to me because I did not like the first Kristen Hanna book that I read. So I need to read a third Kristen Hanna book to see if this one was a fluke or if The Nightingale just didn't work for me. The next book I want to talk about is Safe Word is Devil's Snare by Shay Alani. This is a fan fiction, but it's on Goodreads. So I dragged it as part of my Goodreads goal. And it's like a BDSM fan fiction between Neville and Hermione. Okay. And so I know that fan fiction is not for everybody. Truly, it's not usually my cup of tea, because it can be so ridiculous. But this one, like, I really felt their love story. I really liked the spicy scenes in it. I liked the take on the world. What I like about fan fiction is, in a normal book, you have to make me believe these characters, right? Like, you have to build up all of these things in the characters. And for books that like really require you to feel for the characters, I think that can be like a pretty hard ask and pretty difficult for me to like really buy into your characters enough to get to your story. And so fan fiction is easy because obviously I have read Harry Potter, I've seen the movies, I know who these characters are. So all this author had to do at the beginning was be like, in this world, these things have happened, now let's get to the meat of the story. And for some reason, like, that doesn't always work for me, but in this case, I thought it was fine. Yeah, I had a great time reading that one, and I think if you like Harry Potter fan fiction, Safe Word is Devil's Snare is great. And I would never have thought to put Neville and Hermione together, but I talked about this in the vlog that I read it into. Neville was like the hottest one in the movies at the end. Like, Matthew Lewis's glow up, insane. I hope he's doing well. The other book that did not get 5 stars for me, but was really surprising to me that I enjoyed it so much, is Shiver by Maggie Stiefvater. This is the first book in the Wolves of Mercy Falls series. And I talked about when I read this book that it's a shapeshifter romance thing. There's this girl who is like really connected to the wolves that live in the wooded area behind her house. Turns out the wolves are boys, and then the story goes from there. So there's werewolves in Mercy Falls. And I just truly enjoyed this book. I had a great time. It felt like very nostalgic for me, and I talked about it in the vlog that I read it in, but I think it felt so nostalgic because in 2009 is when this book came out, I was reading books like this. I didn't read this one, but it just like took me back to a time where I did enjoy stuff like this, and I just had a great time reading it. I did read it by audiobook, which I don't think was a terrible experience, but I will say the male narrator is clearly like 50 years old, trying to sound like a teenage boy, and that was odd. But overall, I enjoyed it. I had a good time, okay? It was a fun read for me. Now I'm gonna talk about some books that I did give 5 stars, but I will not be talking about in my best books of the year. These are sort of in order of genre. That's how I like organize my favorite books this year. So the romance books that I want to talk about, Lover Awakened and Lover Eternal by J.R. Ward. I think Lover Eternal is book 2, Lover Awakened is book 3. These are both vampire paranormal romances. They're book 2 and 3 in the Black Dagger Brotherhood series, which is a series about vampires who the elite fighters of this world are called the Black Dagger Brotherhood. And then they're against these guys called the Lessers, which are humans who have lost their souls, and their whole goal is to kill the vampires. And so it just follows these guys who have the most ridiculous names, right? Like, one of them's name is Sadist, but it's spelled with a Z. Very edgy. There's also Torment, which is spelled T-O-H-R-M-E-N-T. Revenge is a character's name, and it's R-E-H-V-E-N-G-E. So you get it. It's very silly, okay? It's a little cringe, okay? But I read the first book in the series, and I honestly contemplated just DNFing the series because I gave it 3 stars. Like, it was fine. I was interested in the world that it was building, which is why I kept reading, and I'm glad I did because I loved books 2 and 3. But book 1 had a very like insta-love thing, and that happens. So these vampires, when they meet the person they're supposed to be with, sometimes they just like a switch flips and they're suddenly in love with that person. And that doesn't work for me personally. I'm like, well, that's convenient, but like, why do they like each other? You know what I mean? That part doesn't work for me. But in books 2 and 3, The reason I gave 2 5-stars is because it was hinting at the relationship that was going to happen in book 3, which is between Sadis, which is my favorite brother, and you can, if you've read the books and you think that's fucked up, you can tell me in the comments, but I was right, so it's fine. And Bella, who is a vampire who comes to them through this exchange of circumstances. I'm not really going to go into it because I think I did talk about it a lot in my wrap up, but I absolutely loved their relationship. I loved the he's this scarred hero who's having this really hard time with his past, and he has this very traumatic past, okay, and it goes into it. So I don't know if there are trigger warnings for this book because it came out in the early 2000s, so possibly not, but severe trigger warnings for SA, rape, all of that stuff, okay? It's very dark. But I love his relationship with Bella and the way that they work things out. And I don't know, it really worked for me. I really enjoyed it. I like the greater world at large. I'm reading book 5 right now, I think. And I haven't had another 5 stars from the series yet. And I don't think book 5 is gonna do it for me, but it might. I was really excited to read book 5, and then it feels weird now that I'm reading it. But anyways, I was so surprised by those books because of how little I cared for the first one. I didn't dislike it, but I was like, okay, it's fine. It's a vampire romance. I would at least recommend people read through book 3, and then you can let me know if you hate it. The next book that I want to talk about is a horror book that I gave 5 stars this year. A lot of these I read very recently. I read those 2 in December, and I also read this book in December, How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. I loved this book. It was so good, okay? I enjoyed the other Grady Hendrix book that I read, Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, I think is what it was called. I like that book. One thing that Grady Hendrix always does is he makes it to where people either don't believe the main character about what they're talking about, or he does miscommunication kind of, where the characters aren't talking to each other, and that can be really frustrating. But I absolutely loved this book. So this book is about a brother and sister whose parents have died, and so they have to sell their parents' house, but their mom made these creepy doll puppet things, and they're haunted. So before they can sell this house, they have to get rid of whatever is haunting the house, right? So they have to work together, but they hate each other. They just have never really gotten along since they were kids, and so it's a little bit about them having to repair their relationship. You're figuring out, because for the most of the book, you're following the female character. I think her name's Elise. I could be wrong with that. But you're following her character and perspective. And then you get, the brother is Mark. I looked this up. That's why I know. But you get Mark's perspective for part of it. And that sort of flips his character around for you. I just really liked this book. I had a great time reading it. I thought that the horror elements had the perfect balance of Grady Hendrix humor and levity to the very serious things that were happening. And I don't know, it was a silly, goofy time, and I was enjoying it. What I like in horror is levity and cozy vibes, because I describe Darcy Coates as cozy horror, which I don't know if other people think that, but because of the atmospheric buildup and the quaint small town vibe or whatever, it feels cozier than just sinister all the time. And I think I like that. I like a little lift in the mood. So if you have any other recommendations, let me know. I have 3 general fiction books that really surprised me this year. One is I Liked My Life by Abby Fiashi. I read this also as part of Spookathon. This book was so good, okay? And I, obviously, again, I don't read books that I think I'm not gonna like, right? I loved this book. It's about this woman who has, before the story starts, she has committed suicide, and she is watching her husband and daughter grieve and she's doing what she can in the afterlife to try to make the grieving process easier for them. Without spoiling anything, you do get a resolution at the end, because that was one thing that I was very iffy on. That's why this book got 5 stars for me, is because I loved the way it resolved. But yeah, it's just a really beautiful story of grief and loss. So I really enjoyed this book. I know that with that subject matter, it will not be for everyone, and I think a lot of people have not picked it up because of that, but it does resolve itself. So I don't want to spoil anything, but I don't know, I loved it. Next book I want to talk about is You'd Be Home Now by Kathleen Glasgow. And this surprised me because it is YA, and I have not been loving YA as much, but this is a YA contemporary about a girl who over the summer gets into a car accident, and it's her brother's friend is driving. Her brother OD'd on heroin at the party that they were at. So she's in the back seat with her brother and this girl from her school, a friend who's not super close to her, and the girl dies in the car accident, and she's the only one who dies. And so it's about her recovering from this car accident, recovering from the judgment of everybody judging her for who her brother is and her brother's friend. They're both sent away, and it really is just about being a family member of an addict. And I think it did a really, really phenomenal job with that. And I felt very seen by this book, so I really enjoyed it for that aspect. It did make me cry like a little baby, but I loved this book. I understand that it's not a perfect book and it will not be for everyone, but I think if you can handle the subject matter, especially if your life has been affected by an addict, whether it's a friend, family member, whatever, I don't know, I found it very meaningful, so I really enjoyed it. But it is dark and it is sad, so I don't want to it's not like a happy spin on a story. It's very sad. But anyways, the other book that I want to talk about that I was super pleasantly surprised by is One Italian Summer by Rebecca Surley. And I read this in May, and I loved it. Okay, so this is about a woman whose mother has just died, and her and her mom were supposed to go to Positano for this girls trip. Her mom was sick, her mom died. She's now engaged to this guy, and she's like, look, I'm gonna go to Positano by myself to have this trip to bond with my mom and grieve her loss. So she does that. But in Positano, she ends up running into her mother when her mother was younger. So it's kind of like a time capsule type book. It's a little bit magical realism. I want to read more by this author because I think she does other things like this from what I've heard. And I love stuff like that. I was not expecting to love this as much as I did because it's classed as romance, and I was concerned because she's got a partner here and she goes back in time here. But I didn't find it to be a romance. It's more of a chick lit recovering from grief type story, and I really loved it. If you love family relationships in books, which I do, and if you love grief in books, which again I do, I thought this was a phenomenal book. I still consider this a lighthearted read. I would consider this almost like a beach read. It was so good. I really enjoyed it. I'm gonna talk about 2 nonfiction books that I'm not putting on my favorites of the year. I'm not putting any nonfiction on my favorites of the year this year, but these are 2 of the nonfiction books that I really, really loved and did not necessarily expect to love. First, 9 Lies About Work by Marcus Buckingham and Ashley Goodall. This book, I did not expect to love as much as I did. I cried reading this book. I talked about it. I read it in November. It was great. It's about how to be a better manager and things that managers think are good for their company and good for their employees versus what actually is. And it was just so well done. I loved this book. I don't know why, but I really, really enjoyed it. So odd, but that's a book that I would recommend if you are interested, I guess. The other one that I want to talk about is You Can Make This Place Beautiful by Maggie Smith. So I saw Maggie Smith, and we all know Maggie Smith from Harry Potter. And I saw that it was a memoir, so I thought it was her memoir. Turns out no. Maggie Smith is also an American poet, and it's her memoir, but it's really talking about her life, but it's set primarily in the aftermath of her going through a pretty messy divorce. And so it's about her meeting her husband, them getting divorced, and what led to that divorce and how she feels about it. And then as the book goes on, it I don't know, I wanted to rage for her. So I really enjoyed this book. I was surprised because, first of all, it was not the person that I thought I was supposed to be. So I was okay, I don't know if I'm gonna care about this. Second of all, she's a poet, and we all know that I don't really like poetry that much. And there are some poems in here, but it was fine. And third of all, I don't know, I guess I haven't explored whether I like things that are about divorce. I do like the human condition examined in books. Particularly, I feel very seen when I see how people handle sad situations. So maybe that's why this worked for me. I don't know, but I did really enjoy it. Ultimately, it was a great book. It made me cry. It made me feel very angry. I felt very happy for her at times. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. I have 2 more books to talk about. We're almost done. So first, the other book about toxic friendship that I wanted to talk about, The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshani Chokshi. And this is a gothic fantasy. It was nominated for the Goodreads Choice Awards. I don't think it made it past the first round. I personally liked it way better than Starling House, but I know that's an unpopular opinion. The Last Tale of the Flower Bride, however, I loved. So it's about this woman. I'm not going to remember. I think her name's Indigo. And I think she had a childhood friend named Azure. And so the story, you have the present day timeline, which is Indigo meeting the bridegroom, who doesn't get a name, very Rebecca, but it's the man, which again I just loved the subversion on the trope. It was great for me. And he is in love with this woman, Indigo. They've gotten married, and she says the only rule is he can't look into her past. And then we also get past timelines with her childhood friend Azure. And Indigo grew up very privileged, rich, in this really beautiful house in the Pacific Northwest. And she has maybe magical abilities. Like the houses may be magic, and there's also like maybe a fairy world that she can access, and she and Azure are like sort of obsessed with this idea, right? And it explores their toxic friendship and how that goes awry. And frankly, I loved it. I did call most of what happened in this book. I don't think it was like that shocking. I don't necessarily think it was obvious, but I think like you read it and you know that there has to be another shoe that drops somewhere, and you can kind of figure out what the other shoe is going to be. And so for that reason, it wasn't like super surprising to me, but I did really enjoy it. I had a great time reading it, and I was so pleasantly surprised by it because I did not know if Gothics were for me. I'm thinking maybe they are. So if you have other Gothic recs, let me know. I still need to read Rebecca, and I also need to read My Cousin Rachel and other things probably, but I enjoyed it. I had a great time. The last most surprising book that I want to talk about is the Queen of the Teerling series. And I know that I also talked about this in my most disappointing section. So I was pleasantly surprised by this book, specifically book 2. So it's The Queen of the Teerling, The Invasion of the Teerling, and then The Fate of the Teerling. And then there's Beneath the Keep, which is prequel. I read all of those books last year. Frankly, the writing style, phenomenal. It's an adult fantasy series. It follows this girl, Kelsey, and she's 19 now. And so the Queen's Guard comes and finds her and takes her back to her kingdom because she needs to ascend to the throne, basically. And she was taken from the throne when she was 1. I think she was a toddler or an infant, a baby, somewhere in like the 0 to 2 range. Because her mother was assassinated. And so to protect her and to protect the keep, they took her, and she's been living with these people who she's always known, very like Sleeping Beauty style, you know? But she's going back because she's got to take over this throne, and she sort of realizes that her mother is not the person that everyone told her mother was. The kingdom is not the way that everyone said that the kingdom was, and she's got to figure out what is going on. And then in book 2, you start getting these 300 years in the past timelines that are so interesting. That was my favorite part about this book. That's what really surprised me. So I loved book 1. I read the whole thing, I devoured it, and immediately picked up book 2. And book 2, I was like so thrown. Like it, honestly, if the series didn't end the way it did, book 2 would be on my best books of the year. But at this point, like, I feel like I can't recommend these books without giving the caveat of I did not like the ending of the series. I do not like the prequel. I don't think you should read it. I just feel like there was so much potential built up, and then I don't know. I just didn't like the way it ended. I'm not going to spoil it, obviously, but I have my like extreme thoughts. And for me, I was so like pleasantly surprised by the first 2 books in the series, and I loved her writing style. I loved her ideas. And I'm excited to read more from her. I was just so disappointed by the ending of the series that it is unfortunately not going to make it on my best books of the year. But I do think you should read it. Like, I want other people to read it and let me know if you are also disappointed by the ending. Like, I do think it's worth the read. That's what I'm trying to tell you. It's like worth the journey. I just wish that it ended a little differently. But that's it. Those are my most surprising books of 2023. I think I talked about like 15 or 18 books here. So hopefully if you have not read some of these, you can pick them up and let me know what you think about them. Maybe if you, like me, had maybe some negative preconceptions of them or weren't sure if you were gonna like them. If you have similar tastes to me in any of these categories, I think you will enjoy them because I loved the majority of these books and I like really enjoyed my time with the others. But that's it. Thank you so much for watching this video. My best books of the year is to come still. I don't know exactly when I'm gonna have that up, but it'll be in January. So I'm just really milking this end of the year content for all it's worth. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you will give it a thumbs up. I hope you will consider subscribing to my channel before you go. I do post 2 videos every single week, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!